Hello, everybody at Contact in the Desert. I'm delighted to join you to share this workshop looking at the mysteries of megalithic and ancient Mexico. I want to thank Contact in the Desert organizers for having me here. I'm also going to be doing a intensive looking at the forces within crop circles and earth energies. But now we're going to get into the realms of ancient Mexico. The title of this talk is Olmec Origins and the Mystery of Mexico's Megalith Builders. And you can see in the image here, we've got a few different things: the elongated skulls, the giant colossal Olmec heads, and the giants of ancient Mexico, which is something I'm going to get into as well, because they were linked with the very founding, the very earliest phase of Mexico. The earliest evidence of this ancient megalithic culture in ancient Mexico, the Olmecs very specifically, they're a very important ancient culture, and we question if they were the first temple builders. The origins of the Mayans and their calendar actually relates back to the Olmecs. There's artifacts, very unusual artifacts we're going to take a look at. And where did they come from? Africa, China, or were they Native American? We'll also look at Quetzalcoatl, or the mysteries of the plumed serpent, elongated skulls, and of course the giants, the Quinametzin giants, which will who are linked with the very founding of ancient Mexico. This just shows you a map of the area of interest here, specifically the Olmec heartland, and also around Mexico City. There's a lot of very, very interesting sites. And we'll begin by zooming in to the area of the Gulf Coast, the coastal Cocos, Minatitlán, and a few other areas. And you have these amazing rivers. And you see the islands in the rivers there. These are actually very interesting because these are actually where some of the Olmec cities are built, actually on these islands. They often would create these mega earthen and stone platforms over a huge scale, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of hours of work to get this together. And I think the Olmecs, really, the most famous aspect of the Olmecs is their colossal stone heads. 17 have been discovered so far. 2 from Tres Zapotes, 4 from La Venta, 10 from San Lorenzo, and 1, the largest one, from La Cabata. And they go back to around 1800 BC at the very earliest, although there's some debate about that nowadays. And they were transported, this very hard basalt, transported from the Tuxtla Mountains. So how they did that is a mystery. There's actually been tests done on how they could have possibly done that. And it's almost impossible job to actually do. We look at some of the sites. This is, again, we're zooming into the area of Olmec land, the Gulf Coast area, which originally we think was called Tamonchan. The Olmec name itself actually translates to the rubber people in Aztec language, and that was named that in the 16th century, the Aztec Nahuatl language. And Father Shahugan and the native chroniclers, that's the name that were given to them. But I think it was a name just given to them rather than the actual names. You'll see there some of the big yellow dots. These are some of the most major sites like La Venta, San Lorenzo, Laguna de los Cerros, and Tres Zapotes. And the first Olmec head was discovered in 1862, ignored, thinking it was some kind of Mayan stone, even though it looked very different to the Maya. In 1905, German archaeologist Edward Seller noted it once more. And here are some of the discoverers and excavators who were involved in the discoveries here. It was near Tres Zapotes, which is really the first head was discovered. That was really commented on by Jose Melgar. And he wrote, and I quote, he was astonished. What astonished me was the Ethiopic type represented. I reflected there had undoubtedly been Negroes in this country, and this had been the first epoch of the world. Franz Blum and Oliver de Lafarge in 1925, they discovered, explored the area and found La Venta, thinking it was just an outpost of the Maya. Herman Bayer in 1927 noted the Olmecs as a completely different civilization, and this was a name really given to them in around 1929. George C. Valiant continued using this name, and then it kind of became stuck as the official name for this culture. But I believe it had a different name, and this would be the Tamon Chan name, which we'll look at a bit later. So we'll look at, as the series of discoveries were being made in Mexico, let's look at those sites in that order. The Tres Zapotes is near a town called Santiago Tuxtla. It's just that the actual site is on the outskirts of Tres Zapotes. The actual is the name of the small village. Santiago Tuxtla is the nearest sort of town, it's a few miles away, and it's a hard place to get to. You can't actually go to the site, but we know where it is now. And all that's left really is a bunch of mounds over a huge area, though. And in the local museum, which is, don't know if it's currently open. It wasn't when we went there in January, but I've been there a few times before. And there's some remarkable stonework here. You can see the Olmec head, this sort of crouched figure sort of leaning up, and you've got even got acoustic stones as well, which we'll look at in a second. This is Matthew Sterling of the Smithsonian Institution, who really made the first discoveries, and this was one of the Olmec heads that was found in 1932, and he kind of worked into the 40s. He had all sorts of trouble finding the site. There was no roads. It was thick jungle and swamps, and he found this very interesting stone, which is called Stella C, and this had glyphs on it, specific long count calendar glyphs that were known as Mayan at the time. Now, what's interesting about this is that this was before the Maya. They dated these to around about 32 BC, actually September the 3rd, 32 BC. The date being 716, 616, 18, which that's what it translates to. Now, some of it was missing, of course, and the rest of it was only discovered later. This was actually on the backside of the stone. You can see this sort of shamanic figure who may have been some kind of priestly astronomer, as well as a kind of Olmec head beneath him. And this is the glyphs on the other side of the stone, which represent this date. And actually the second part of the stone was eventually discovered by his wife, and that's when that date of 32 BC was confirmed. And so even that's not as old as the Olmecs. The Olmecs were around long before that, 1800 BC, 1500 BC. Tres Zapotes was one of the later Olmec sites, so it was probably being finished up around this time these stones were carved. But the long count calendar date is really interesting. Now, you see it's 31 BC there. There's debates about which year it is, whether it's 31 or 32. So we put both in here just to kind of give it some credence. But there's other types of writing on these stones, and it's what they called Epi-Olmec script. A study was done in 1965, and they believe it may have been the first writing in the Americas. Not only that, we have the calendar dates there as well. Chapa de Corzo is another site in the central part of the highlands here of Mexico. And this has a date of 36 BC, so it's a little bit older. And so we've got another Olmec influenced site with an even earlier date. This site is quite large. It looks like a kind of Mayan site, but actually it's late Olmec. We also have, this is actually another photo of the statue being discovered here. They think Tres Zapotes was probably around, 1000 BC, more or less. And interesting, this photo was taken on April the 9th, 1939. That's my birthday. No, I'm not that old. I was born in 73, but just saying, interesting that there was an actual photo taken, and that, and the heat in this part of Mexico, the tropical heat, is really challenging. So imagine what it's like to kind of live there with no fans, no air conditioning. It's very tough. They got threatened by the locals who didn't like them, and so on and so forth. So it's a really tough kind of excavation, but they found some amazing things. And today, this is what you see. This is the kind of on-site museum. It's just a couple of dollars or pounds to get in. There's some beautiful things on display there. We'll have a look at a couple of these. This is the huge, like, acoustic stone. I spent some time tapping on this, and you get different notes out of different parts of the stone. And it almost looks like there's a bit broken off it at this side of it on the back. And it's almost like they would bang it together, like, somehow the stone would be slightly be able to move, and they bang it together and they get this huge resonating sound. And so it appears they had some kind of acoustic technology here at Tres Zapotes. Again, we have the Olmec head, which is on display there. You get an interesting kind of helmet, interesting earpieces, very intricate carving in very hard basalt. This is not an easy stone to carve. There was tests done by the BBC where they failed to even make an indent in the stone using what tools they thought they were using back then in Mexico. This is the actual site itself. You can see it's kind of messy. There's just a few groups over quite a vast area, mind you, over like probably several square miles. I've been up there. I've flown the drone around. This is actually one of the mounds. I was on a tour there a few years ago with a group. This was once a pyramid. It probably was stone faced with earth underneath, with protruding statues coming out the base and probably stone steps on it. Here's like an elongated kind of pyramid at the site now, and now is mostly inhabited by cattle, not many humans in the area. But yeah, here's just another one of the what's left of the pyramids, and another one in the background on the right there. And even while I was there, I found, you know, literally finding artifacts, probably Olmec artifacts, as you walk around. So the fact is, you're finding things there even today, which is quite amazing. But let's head a few miles away from there to a site originally called La Cabata. Now, this was a site related to Tres Zapotes. It was probably one of the last sites of the whole kind of Olmec world. And so it's kind of interesting that this is the last one, and it's also the largest Olmec head of them all by far. This is like 40 tons. It's like 9 feet tall, and it was found actually by a bunch of students when they were kind of having tea, lunch at an excavation, and this was found underneath them. So they were actually sitting on what they thought was just a natural boulder. So it had been like buried deliberately, like many of these Olmec heads are. We have another few of it here, and like I said, this came from La Cabata or Rancho Cabata. It appears to be unfinished. The eyes have not been carved, or what some people suggest is that indeed they were carved and they were deliberately looked to be closed because this was the last Olmec head. This was the final phase of the whole Olmec culture in Mexico. We have another Olmec head. This is again from Tres Zapotes. It's now on display at Santiago Tuxtla, which is the same area, the same town, a few miles away, where that huge head is as well, in the main square. This one's interesting. It's got very interesting, almost like African features. It's got an earpiece, again, the helmet. And it's got like braids on the back of the actual stone. These are very like Western African style, apparently, or Ethiopian in some cases. Here we have La Cabata again, an illustration, so it gives you more detail of what the head actually looks like. We have other beautiful carvings on display actually in the museum. This is made of andesite. This is the same kind of rock you find at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku in Bolivia. Extremely hard rock, incredibly difficult to carve, and somehow they did it, and you know, using primitive tools apparently. But there's good evidence that they were master stonemasons, and there's more and more evidence of this African connection, which we'll get into in this workshop. But is it Egyptian technology we're really looking at? That's the question. We also have this, is actually called El Negro. That's the name given to him. And you see it's kind of long, it goes backwards. This would be placed at the base of the pyramids on either side of the steps. So there'd probably be two of these here. And look at the kind of haircut and the facial features, and you can clearly see that this is not kind of Native American style. And so it's very, very, very interesting. We have another statue here. This is again from Tres Zapotes, and another kind of strange looking statue right next to it on the right, which is probably part of a larger piece. And again, now we'll start seeing these connections with Africa and Egypt, because this is something that Ivan van Sertima, in his brilliant 1977 book, They Came Before Columbus, noted these similarities between these different cultures. On the bottom there, on the bottom left, you've got Egyptian god Osiris lying prone, and then you have this Tresopota statue in the same style. We have on the top right there a Nubian chief, and also the stone head. We looked at the stone kind of statue, that elongated one. And also from the bottom right there, we have another one from Veracruz, again, which has African features. And these were all noted in this book by Ivan van Sertima, who's unfortunately passed away in 2009. He was a Guyanese-born associate professor of Africana studies at Rutgers University in the United States. And he was really the foremost authority on African presence in the Americas. Now, we're not just talking about the Olmecs in Mexico. We're talking North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean islands, and even Alaska and places like this. And I quote him here. He says, a study of the Olmec civilization reveals elements that so closely parallel ritual traits and techniques in the Egypto-Nubian world of the same period that it is difficult to maintain that all these are due to mere coincidence. And he really put forward this theory. He wrote several books about this. Many other authors then followed that kind of progression of thought. And there's very, very good evidence for this African connection with the Olmecs. It may even have been, as we'll see later, some of the early, very ancient, like pre-dynastic, going back to 3,100 or so BC, because that's when this long count calendar began, which is believed the Olmecs started in 3,114 BC. It's also the beginning of the first pharaonic dynasty in ancient Egypt. So the connections are clearly there. Now have a look at San Lorenzo. This is the oldest site, the kind of original capital of the Olmecs. It's a huge site. Again, there's not too much left. Again, Matthew Sterling excavated this in 1945. He'd been to La Venta before that, but we'll get onto that shortly. But he had treacherous weather to deal with. It was attacked by locals, worried that the ancestral kind of connections were being taken away by these Western white people. And we see some of the most remarkable stonework in all of the Americas here. And you can see the trouble they had to get there using horseback and donkeys, going through swamps and rivers with horrendous tropical storms and consistent rain. We have a color photo here of one of the 10 heads that have now been found there. This is actually a photo, I believe, with a Michael Coe from 1964. He found one of the other heads. He got carbon dates of at least 1200 BC and older, even though it's suggested it may go back to 1800 BC. There's actually dating that goes back even before that. But we have this as well. This is one of the most recently discovered Olmec heads. This is actually discovered in 1994 by thanks to Ann Cyphers, who's an American archaeologist, and they used a magnetometer survey where they found this lying face upwards at the bottom of a ravine, kind of partly covered with water. And on its head, though, it has 92 of these circular beads, which is, there's some question marks about what they are, but we'll come on to that in a moment. Above the forehead is a large element forming a three-toed foot with nails. So you got these shamanic principles on these helmets they were wearing. There's ear spools, there's strange kind of shaping around the eyes, and the quality of the facial features and the pronounced chin are something quite stunning, and almost like the Ramesses, the quality and the symmetry of the Ramesses statues that we find in ancient Egypt. This is actually a photo of the site. Now we're actually looking at the main central part of the site where the Red Palace once existed. Come on to that in a moment. But you can see that not much is left. You just see these elongated mounds. You see what's left of the pyramids. But this whole area, you can see it's raised above the area in the background. This was artificially constructed, a lot of this, to raise it and flatten it to this huge level. And there were temples, there were palaces, there were pyramids, there were walkways made of stone, there were huge megalithic columns that are still on display in the museum. And this is actually part of the Ann Cyphers excavation in the 1990s. It was called the Red Palace because it had this type of red stone, which is iron rich, and it would create this whole red look about it. And they believe And there was actually some painting done in red in there as well. And you can see in there, you can actually see some of these channels in there. Now, these are water channels that go throughout the site. The whole site has these water channels from the highest point all the way to the edges going into the fields, as though they were channeling and moving water around specifically. And it's thought now that they were doing that not just to water the plants, but actually to charge up the water and create high fertility in the crops. Here's some of the photos and reconstructions from the excavation. You can see the size of some of those megalithic pillars on the top right there. And you can see the way that this whole kind of palace area with these aqueducts, the megalithic stone heads, also these altars, which we'll talk about shortly, which were actually often carved into heads after they've been used as these sacred shamanic altars. So it's some remarkable discoveries were made here. And this just shows you another kind of map of where certain things were found. There was wells, there was, again, these aqueducts, and all this kind of stuff that hints at not just ceremonial and ritual use, but actually technological and energetic use. Like they were charging up using the water, using the natural earth energies, because many of these sites were actually built on magnetic anomalies. And this has actually been recorded and worked with by John Burke and others in his book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. We'll come on to that shortly. But there's some interesting dating in the middle one here, 1933, and the one above that, 1931. We have 2260 BC, where this is the dating they're getting from some too old, it says, perhaps some asphalt lumps present, but perhaps actually the dating might even be older than people realize, because they're always very conservative when it comes to the dating, and no dating has really been done on this area since the 90s. And it's now thought that carbon dating can be inaccurate and it could be much older. And this would fit with the theory that actually the first builders instigated the long count calendar, 3114 BC, which parallels the megalithic explosion in Europe and the beginning of the pharaonic dynasties in ancient Egypt. Now, at San Lorenzo, they had abundant crops, abundant wealth. They were rich. They were trading all over the country, possibly in different parts of the world. Here we have a very large piece of basalt. You can see the size of it next to this truck, with these striations and cuts in it, like they've softened the stone. We have these are on display as well at the museum. We have anthropomorphic carvings. We have stone spheres. We have huge bird effigies. We don't even know what the head was on that. We have these kind of human figures crouched over the stones. We have this mutilated sort of baby statue, other features that no one knows what they were used for, but this one is particularly interesting. This is called the kind of earth monster, and this is a tradition that was actually taken up later by the Maya, and then some of their later temples were actually like huge facades, and you would actually walk into the earth monster's mouth, going into the body of the monster itself. But the Olmecs got there first. You can see like his shaped teeth. You can see he's also got a beard, and he's showing signs of anger and kind of power there. And so he was often related to also to Tlaloc and to the wind and the thunder gods, again, which is linked with the Quinametsin giants, which we'll come on to shortly. There's a few other mounds here on display, but what's interesting, like the levels of these mounds, they're built with pebbles from stream beds that are stained with iron, so they're electrically conductive. This is all, every single one had this layer at its base. Then they had water coursing through the natural basalt rock under the site, and this would cause naturally electric charge. They found 21 man-made lakes up on the plateau lined with water-repellent bentonite rock, which is magnetic, and 14 natural springs at the base. They were masters of manipulating water to create energy. Sluice gates controlled fast water flow, and rushing water went from one place to another. Hundreds of tons of basalt was brought in to create these. And if you go to the museum, you see these piles of these small rocks that create these water things. So they were doing this for a reason. This wasn't just, ceremonial. This was serious kind of science and technology at play here. So the combination of the rushing water, the magnetic rock, and high metal content was a brilliant electricity conductor. The charge would gather on the top of the hills, and seeds and grains were placed there and could be charged up and utilized and kind of absolutely kind of become like this abundant crop seed and grain, which would then feed their population. And they found, this is the work of John Burke, that actually they would get, when they planted that seeds against controls that hadn't been charged up like this, they'd get up to 3 times the yield, larger, more healthy, frost-resistant crop, which would feed more people. And that's how their abundance and their trading capability and their wealth came into play. So they had an understanding of this, and they were also working with magnetism. This was part of the science, part of the technology. And there's a strong connection with iron ore that they were using, and also the fact that San Lorenzo was built on a huge magnetic anomaly, as were the other sites. And also when you kind of have concave mirrors made of this kind of obsidian and magnetite and other such things, and they even found this compass here as well, which if you place a needle on it with a piece of string over this piece of magnetite, it would align to 8 degrees off north. And that's interesting in its own right, because some of the Olmec sites are aligned to that way, slightly off north. So we have this very, very interesting thing going on here. You can see it's got a groove along the center, and they think it served as a directional finder along, basically like almost like a dowsing rod, if you like. But under experiment, it repeatedly provided a consistent bearing to within half a degree of about 30 meters. It's 8 degrees off north. Now, that's not the only thing, the only Olmec kind of connection with magnetism. We find these at a place called La Democracia down in southern Guatemala, which was a later Olmec outpost. And there's these what are called fat boy statues, or Buddha kind of type statues. And we also find it in the Olmec heads in the temple area, where the magnetic orientation of a rock hits this point when rock is formed, especially basalt. And they were choosing, carving around this spot here. It was the belly button, it was the navel, which had the magnetic power, and the same with the temples on the main Olmec heads. And so, you know, at a place in 1983, a humanoid sculpture at Tuxtla Chica was found, where a small statue had this in the temple as well. And also, so what we're looking at here is this connection between magnetism, working with water, magnetic kind of anomalies in the earth, and earth energies. This is what the Olmecs were masters of: earth energies and controlling the elements. So this is one. We'll have a look at some of the Olmec heads in a little bit more detail, so you can see what we're doing here. Most of these are on display at Jalapa Museum, which is probably 100 miles from San Lorenzo, but that's where most of the Olmec stone artwork is. This is nearly 3 meters high and 2 meters wide. And you'll notice the back of the head is often flat, and they think this was part of the cradle boarding, cranial deformation techniques that the Olmecs actually kind of came up with in the whole of the Americas. They were the originators of it, potentially. This is the second head. It's slightly smaller. This is actually in Mexico City in the main anthropology museum. And you can see all the headgear. You can see the deliberate damage down the cheek and other areas, as though it looked, you know, people say it's damaged, but it could have been the tuning of the stones. They tuned these Olmec magnetic heads. It's like these were given the power, these were given the magnetism out from the actual heads themselves, is what people believed. We have another one here, slightly more rounded head. We have feathers, braids going down the back. We have another one here, the beautiful one, actually. This again was discovered by Matthew Sterling, with the sort of two-way kind of design on the Olmec head. This one's in Jalapa Museum. It's kind of got a big frown on it with kind of claws coming down the front. This one is head number 6. This is actually a beautifully carved one, stunning designs on it. And you can see this in the main museum in Mexico City. Head 7, very badly mutilated. This is in Jalapa. This one is also in Jalapa, with these sort of stunning feathers going across the cap. He looks a bit different to the others. He hasn't got a flat back of the head. And finally, this is the last one discovered before 1994. This is the smiling one, the smiling, almost smiling head from San Lorenzo. And this is the one discovered in 1994, which is actually in San Lorenzo itself. So yeah, these are all the heads, the 17 of them, all in one poster. And you can see how different in size they are, um, with the gentleman standing next to them in different areas. But at Jalapa Museum, we have tons of the San Lorenzo stonework on display with these almost Egyptian crouching figures holding something against the ground. This is what's called the Quizzo position, but it's also potentially a position which we find many Egyptian statues with. And also on the right, the bottom right there, we have these huge altars. Now, these are thought to be where the king or the shaman would sit on top. These, again, have magnetic intensity and qualities within them. Again, here's some of the other statues found there. So we must remember, if we just jump back to this one, actually at San Lorenzo itself, they found something that JJ Ainsworth spotted as well. It's in the museum, they found all these Elemenite magnetic beads that look like what's on the skull here, look like what's on the hat. And you place those on your head. And this is something that Michael Persinger pointed out, that it would affect your consciousness. It would affect your glands in your brain and give you potentially hallucinations. And so that could have been the reason why they were working with it, not just for their scientific project of fertility and crop growth and things like this, but also consciousness. We also have the kind of lost Olmec city of Laguna de los Cerros. This is a very interesting site. I visited here a couple of times, got bitten to shreds by these tiny ticks. That's what it looks like from the air. I did some drone footage of it as well, but this photo kind of really sums up. This is a huge site. I mean, just to give you that pyramid on the top left there is actually pretty, it's actually pretty big. And this is some of the statues that were found here. And you can see the crosses on the eye. You can see the kind of almost like superhero kind of Doctor Strange outfits these guys were wearing. This is a later Olmec site, probably about 1000 to 500 BC. But the cross on the eyes and the kind of earth monster figure there, again, may be connected with Quetzalcoatl and with Tlaloc. We have, this is interesting. This was found, this is another, just some artifacts we're going to look at. This was found near Mahora. This is from the Tuxtla Mountains. It's called the Tuxtla Statuette. It's a nephrite jade piece discovered in 1902 by a farmer plowing his field in the west foothills of the mountains there. 75 glyphs are on it, and Epi-Olmec, or what's called Isthmian script. One of the few examples of this very early writing. It has a long count date of 162 AD. And this is a very strange kind of anamorphic kind of build human, with a kind of duck's bill coming out of it, a human figure, with this remarkable artwork, potential language on it as well. We have other elements of language. This was found in 2002. This is near La Venta. This is actually a kind of sort of like cylinder seal, and you put ink on it and you roll it, and this is actually what it ends up looking like. And there's actually words coming out of it, and it's basically king and 3 Ahawa, which is a Mayan kind of glyph, which is part of the sacred calendar, the Zolkin calendar. And so this was like a kind of king seal of the ancient Olmecs, which is absolutely fascinating in its own right. Now, we mentioned La Venta. Now, this is really the final kind of major site that you can actually visit. I've been in many times. There's most of the statues have been moved from here. They're now on display in Villa Hermosa in La Venta Park, and they were moved by Carlos Pellica. But this site is built upon a huge magnetic and gravitational anomaly. It was specifically chosen, and it's on a large island in the middle of the river. And it was the Tonala River, which is one of the 2 main rivers that comes down from the Gulf Coast through coastal Caucasus. And you can see the huge pyramid there. There's multiple elements buried in the ground here, including these huge mosaic pavements, these multiple layers, like 50 layers of serpentine, these massive statues above ground. There's the small jade figures that were buried as well. There's lots of buried stuff going on here. All the graves, the tombs, the megalithic tombs were also buried here. This is just a quick drone clip of some of the basalt columns that were dragged all the way from the Tuxtla Mountains. Now, there were hundreds of these here. Some of them were like 7-10 feet tall, probably weighing several tons each. And this is just what's left. And this would have surrounded this whole central sacred area of the site at the northern end. We have these, again, almost Egyptian looking statues, and the main pyramid in the background. The main pyramid would have been huge, absolutely huge. It's something like 110 feet tall, 33 meters. It's 100,000 cubic meters of earth. They think it could have been a conical shape, but others suggest it could be a seven-sided fluted pyramid based upon the nearby volcano. It could have been a rectangular pyramid with step sides and inset corners, according to Rebecca Gonzalez-Lauk. But it's been here for 2,500 years, so there's a lot of erosion. It's never been excavated either, so there could be some very important things. But they found on the south side of the pyramid this huge magnetic anomaly, as well as a whole gravitational anomaly in this whole area. And they found burnt clay and a cache of offerings in a small tomb over to one side, just nearby. Now, there are multiple tombs found there. You have these altars, you have these heads, you have these, like this one's called the warrior statue. This is on the south side of the pyramid with these multiple platforms all over the area. With these, we'll go into detail about some of these soon, but that's generally what the site would have looked like, oriented 8 degrees of north, which would have aligned to Cygnus around 2000 BC, according to a couple of researchers, including Andrew Collins. The Olmec heads were near those in the north side. They were near some of these basalt columns, but they were actually all facing the other way. These replicas facing inwards, but they were actually facing outwards, so almost like protecting the site. We have these gigantic statues here, beautiful. This is actually made of prismatic basalt. This is what most of these columns were made from. We also have water channels. Again, these were used exactly the same way they were at San Lorenzo to harness electric charge, earth energies to enhance the crops, seeds and grains and everything else. And this is Monument 1, discovered by Franz Blohm and Ulla Lafarge in 1925. This is, some people have compared this one to the face of the Sphinx. It's got remarkable similarities. This is the most smiley Olmec head. And also we have another very worn one here. This is not quite as big as the others, but even though the facial details are lost, they would have been very, very remarkable carving. Again, we have this one as well. This was discovered by Matthew Stirling in 1939, Monument 4. Then we have this almost like unfinished kind of stone, and it almost looks like they've softened the stone and melted it. This is the kind of theory they had this technology to kind of manipulate the stone, like we find these striations on stones in different parts of the world. But even in the area, we actually met, this is actually Brian and myself met this guy who's got these Olmec features. So descendants of the Olmecs are still present in this part of Mexico. We have other huge statues here. These are thought to be kind of crouching figures, but these could have actually been Olmec heads. These were discovered 2 decades ago, I think. And we have Matthew Stirling guarding one of these sites, but he was the one who recorded actually this legend. This is from a certain Don Sebastian Torres, who was 80 years he had protected the site. After, he was 80 when Stirling arrived in 1940, and he was told that ghosts of the Aztec emperor Montezuma would sing and dance in the ruins, and he said he witnessed this. So strange spirits of the Olmec still seem to be present there. Now we have this very interesting large altar to the south of the site. It's beautifully carved. It's got multiple serpents, all 4 serpents coming in to the center. It's got another kind of serpent around the base, which turns into this female's arm, which is around one side of it. You can see me just posing there with it. But yeah, and as you see on the side here, there's actually a female figure and her arm turns into the serpent, and this gentleman shaman is like holding it down to the ground. And I think this must represent some kind of earth energies here. One hand is on it and the other hand is on his foot. Now, this position he's sitting in as well, this again is the Quizzo position. And these altars were later often turned into Olmec heads. So it's almost like the ruler would sit upon this, absorb the power. And we know, I'll tell you about the power in a moment of these sites, these stones. And eventually, when he died, it would then be turned into the Olmec head. That's one of the theories. And they would carve it from these seats of power. Interestingly, when I went here in 2009, I went there with my friend Ivan Orozco, who's local to Villa Hermosa. And we had an experience at this particular stone. And we felt this force field like coming off it, like strong. We could almost put your hand in it. You could walk into it. It was like 10, 15 or 10 or 15 feet away from the stone. But there was some kind of magnetic force. And whether we triggered it by doing something, we had this strange experience at this particular stone. So there's certainly still energy here, still power within these stones and these sites. We have this kind of dwarf goddess figure as well. And she's actually emerging from the mouth of the earth monster, which we've already talked about. This is a rarity, because we don't find many dwarf statues in Olmec land. We do get them in Maya world, like Uxmal and other places. But to get them here is really, really interesting. And it's a female figure as well. We have these sort of cleft skull kind of stone statues of heads. This is a tradition of actually elongating and changing the skull, like cranial deformation, where they would expand it like this and dip it in the middle here. It's something we find in Maya lands. We find similar examples down in Peru. On the right there, we have the warrior, and we have all these floating kind of men around the top of it as well, which has caused much confusion and trying to understand the meaning of this. But the staff he's carrying may have been one of these staffs of power, which is depicted often in the Mayan world. This is one of the tombs of the Olmecs. This was buried at La Venta with these gigantic basalt columns transported from about 50 miles away. Now, these are interesting because these were buried as well. So this is almost like the tombs you find in Britain, the long barrows, but built with prismatic basalt. It's actually on display. They've reconstructed it in the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. And again, this is what's called the Uncle Sam statue. And we have these floating figures wearing some kind of headgear, or kind of almost like spaceman's helmet. This is something we keep finding. And we also have these almost like European and Middle Eastern facial features. We have beards on some of them. We have this very abstract, very psychedelic kind of look to some of these. This is actually a close-up of the main thing, and you can see the different look compared to the classic Olmec statues. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is Monument 19. Now, this is probably the most important stone carving in all of the Americas, in my opinion. It's about 4 feet tall, maybe 3.5 feet tall at the peak. It's got a gentleman sitting within this huge plumed serpent. The plumes are coming off the serpent's head, holding this bag and wearing some kind of helmet with breathing apparatus. So this is on par with Palenque's tomb lid. And this is something fans of Ancient Aliens will understand. It could be technological. Now, it could have other meaning as well. This is kind of some kind of rattlesnake. You can see the rattle on near the bag, just left of the bag. You've got crosses. You've got him seated in a certain position. He's like, is he pulling a lever there? And so on and so forth. Now, we did a video for this for our YouTube channel going into this in more detail, but this man bag thing has caused a sensation around the world. That's what Graham Hancock calls them. And my good friend Jim Vieira is completely obsessed by them. But what were they carrying in it? That's the question. Was it kapar? Was it incense? Was it psychotropics? Or was it something else? Or is it actually part of a device? And you can just see a close-up of looking at the detailing, but he's got something on his nose and mouth there. And then what that is, we don't know, because that is not a classic kind of headdress you would just find. But something that myself and JJ discovered was in Hapi, where it's actually JJ kind of worked out there was a connection between Olmec land and Egypt, which has already been, in different ways worked out by Ivan van Sertima. But we went there a couple of years ago and found that the god Hapi, in the Isis temple on Philae Island down the Nile, it's got almost exactly the same carving as we get of this Quetzalcoatl plumed serpent figure at La Venta. So again, and also the dating of this site in Egypt is almost identical to La Venta. So is there a connection? Was there like communication and travel going on between these great ancient cultures? Well, there might have been, because this guy is called the Traveler or the Ambassador. And this is at La Venta. And he's got strange glyphs. He's got like curled up shoes, a turban, and he looks more Phoenician than he does Mexican or Olmec. The turned up shoes he is wearing were worn by the Etruscans, the Hittites, and the Phoenicians, who were well-known seafaring explorers. He also has what looks like a beard, and we know that native people of North and Central America were incapable of growing facial hair. It also dates to the time of the Olmecs, and these glyphs are a big mystery. So what do these glyphs mean, and what is he really carrying in his hand? And why is that foot on there? Does that represent the fact that he's a traveler and he's been moving from place to place? It could well be. We also have these gigantic, weird jaguar, like half human, half jaguar mosaics in multiple layers beneath the ground at La Venta. Here's some of the stones of serpentine that some of it was made from. They found 1,000 tons of serpentine in one pit. And it goes multiple levels down with these mosaics in between them, and these other things, these different types of clay and rock and magnetic pebbles going down deep into the ground. Even these jade figures you can see on the bottom left, which are very small, only like 7 or 8 inches tall, were found buried in position in a certain part of La Venta. But why would you do that? Serpentine and jade that comes from the west of Mexico City, which is several hundred miles away. But interestingly, there's actually an Olmec site there called Chalcatzingo, which may be one of the outposts of the Olmecs where they were trading, mining, and other such things. Was this serpentine actually chosen for its qualities, its magnetic kind of energetic qualities? It was first noted by 1794. This just shows you some of the levels here that are going on beneath the ground. We have adobe bricks, pink clay, Celt offerings, obsidian mirrors, clay, mosaic pavements, more clay, different types of clay, 28 courses of stone serpentine set in olive and blue clay matrix. And this is kind of what it would have looked like. And that's all beneath the ground. I mean, to me, that is utterly remarkable. 24 feet deep, 50 feet wide, 61 feet long. The pavement of the weird jaguar was placed on top, then layered with adobe bricks and clay and so forth. And so we have to question, what on earth were they doing? We also have some beautiful jade and unusual flying figures carved into this, almost like Chinese style jade. These were the figures that were buried, the 16 pieces here of humanoid figures that look very kind of more Chinese than they do from Mexico, with these celts, which have got beautiful epi-Olmec script on them. These may represent the basalt columns at the site, these celts, and they date to at least 1200 BC. And they were found deep in the earth in 1955, in situ, in this configuration, which was probably put in there about 800 BC. And there's evidence that it was dug down again, as though someone wanted to check in on them, and then they were reburied again. We're talking, 2,200 years ago, 2,800 years ago. In 1955, they were eventually discovered. And this is kind of what some of the representations of the elongated heads look like. So it's very, very interesting that this even has survived. We know with cranial deformation that the cleft skulls, which we looked at already, are depicted in Chinese prehistory. Anthropologist Louise Levaiths claims that the Chinese arrived in Mexico in 1000 BC as part of the Shang dynasty. Anthropologist Betty Meggers also noted, and I quote, "The features that distinguish the Olmec are present in early Shang civilizations in China." Other similarities that we're noting: the same writing style, other carvings on the J, the use of batons and kind of staffs, a symbol of rank, feline deities like the weird jaguar, and cranial deformation. And the blue-green jade, which is found a lot in this part of the world, is an unknown source, which some people suggest may have even come from China. And he shows you some of the carvings that are still on the celts. Now, this is on display, the original, in the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. And we have this really interesting guy. He's called the Wrestler. Is he really a wrestler? From Uxpanapan in Veracruz. Again, he has very oriental features with full facial hair, a bald head, but facial hair. So what is this? I mean, look at the quality of the carving here. It's really quite humanoid, super realistic. And this would have been probably kind of carved to a point where it was polished. We have other things like this. We have almost like eunuch type children's or baby statues, and it's known that Shang dynasty admirals and ambassadors were often eunuchs. They also elongated the skulls. And so why have we got these depictions going on here in ancient Olmec Mexico? And we have these Olmec statues, the 3 Olmec statues on the left and the Shang dynasty on the right. And this is, not only are they in this Quizo kneeling position, which was this traditional spiritual position, but they also have hairstyles like Mohicans, as worn by Colombians, Africans, Mohawk Indians of the St. Lawrence River. And in China, this hairstyle was linked and associated with ancient magicians and sorcerers. And so the fact is, we're finding almost identical styles here, which suggests this strong Chinese connection to ancient Mexico. We have more of the cleft heads, evidence of this cranial deformation. We have like some kind of helmet being worn. We have Olmec on the left, Chinese on the right, which go, actually the ones on the right are depictions that go back to 4000 BC, so it's even older. And this can be found, this kind of elongation of the skull in the carvings. There are many skulls. This is actually from La Venta. It's actually on display in the La Venta site museum. Many elongated skulls are found. This is from Jaina in Campeche, which is actually a kind of this thought now that the Olmecs, the later Olmecs, may have spread over to the Yucatan in this part of the country. Now, the reason we don't find many Olmec skeletons and skulls is because of the tropical conditions, and it eats up the bones very quickly. They don't survive. And so there's very few that have survived. But there are a few. There's got this giant skull on the left, this other baby elongated skull on the right. These are from slightly later than the Olmecs, but they do show very strong evidence of this cranial deformation. We also have this one from Jalapa Museum, and the one on the bottom left is actually from Nazca in Peru. And for some reason, I put a turtle carving there, but that's just what also found at San Lorenzo. So it's interesting that we also have these reports of Quetzalcoatl going back to the Spanish chronicles, where they talk about him having large eyes and a high or broad forehead, as though he had cranial deformation, which we'll come on to shortly. There's also, we find this connection with Peru, because Quetzalcoatl and some of his followers were described as tall, very fair skinned, sometimes red or black hair with the beards. And we have the same depictions, and we know there were redheads down in ancient Peru, in Nazca. That's why we've got this image here. They were elongating the skull. They were described as being tall, quite powerful looking, and the Viracocha stories in South America almost identical to the stories we find in Mexico and Central and North America. And it's thought that they migrated out, the Olmecs, to different parts of Mexico and possibly down to Central and South America. Now, the name of the Olmecs we mentioned earlier, Tamon Chan, this is something myself and Marco Vergato, who's another author based in Mexico, an Italian descent, but he's and I have been looking at sites in Mexico. We've been collaborating on a few ideas. And it was Father Sahugan during the Spanish conquest who wrote about the culture there, having writing, books and paintings, and they founded a place in an age-old time called Tamon Chan. They even created, and it was said that the very ancient people, possibly the Olmecs, created the 260-day calendar, the Zolkin calendar, which is the book of days, and the book of the year, Book of the Dreams, and eventually Tamo-chan was abandoned. All these different books are different calendars and descriptions and histories that have now been burnt by the Spanish Christians. So there's a lot going on here, but Tamo-chan itself in Aztec tradition translates as land of the bird snake. I mean, that blew my mind when I found that out, because it's Tamo-chan is written about several hundred years ago. So the fact is the Olmec land was called the land of the bird snake, which is mind-blowing in my opinion. Whoever they were, when they died off, they blended into the Maya, Toltecs, and other cultures, but all their knowledge, all their high wisdom, and the teachings that they created were spread out and manifested and were expanded upon, especially the calendars and the pyramid building, by the brilliant Maya people. We also have the area of Coastal Cocos as well. This is like, this actually translates as Serpent Sanctuary. This is where Quetzalcoatl potentially arrived, but this is where he left after being in this part of the world for 20 or so years. And he came in and taught all the arts and sciences, the calendars, writing, even things like vegetarianism, like government, and everything else, like, creating and growing food properly, agriculture, fertility of the landscape, probably earth energies, and working with the land and building these sites in specific ways so they would become oriented to the stars, sun, and moon. And he was this master teacher, and there's a theory that he may have been connected with ancient Egypt, which we'll come on to later. But there's more Egyptian style statues like this one on the left here, where the Olmecs were thought to have spread to down south to southern Guatemala. This is the place called El Baal. There's several sites there, Monte Alto, Abash Takalik, and several others I visited when I was there in 2009. And you can see these remarkable, beautiful carvings. A little bit later, it's believed, than the Olmecs, but still Olmec influences are clearly present here. The one on the right there has this strange kind of teddy bear kind of figure with cloaks and other things. Very abstract. It's almost like he's wearing some kind of helmet, like a space helmet, some people have suggested. We have an Olmec head here at Abash Takalik, or it's called Takalik Abaj as well. It's different ways of saying it. But there's megalithic chambers here. There's tunnels. There's strange statues that are inexplicable. There's these crouched kind of fat boy figures, which we know had this magnetism in their navel. And this navel connection we find in many other cultures with the hands pointing to the navel. We have this amazing museum in the area as well, which has this stunning stonework with these columns, these remarkable 3D relief carvings. We have these two serpents intertwining and eating a small human figure. We also have, again, La Democracia, where we have these magnetic fat boy statues. And also we have this. We have these strange Olmec style heads with what appear to be sunglasses or some kind of eyewear on. Now, this is a symbol of Quetzalcoatl. We'll come on to that shortly. But these are just on display in the main town square. In La Democracia, originally from a site called Monte Alto, which has been partly destroyed. Even in the Guatemala City Museum, we find a similar kind of eyewear on some of the statues. We even find that in a part of the Maya land as well, which we'll look at in a moment. And then we start to see Maya type mushrooms. Now, this is proof. We know that the Olmecs were obsessed by the shamanic realms. We know they were taking 5-MeO DMT. There's depictions of Bufo marinus toad. There's these psilocybin mushrooms. Bufo marinus toad bones were found, for instance, in a ceremonial kind of enclosure at San Lorenzo. So we know they were taking high level DMT, 5-MeO DMT. This is me at Oshkintok. It's got sack bays there. It's got like this kind of labyrinth there as well. And this is some of the statues that were found there. The one in the middle particularly interests me. This is actually on display at the This is Oshkintok. I should just be clear. This is actually in the Yucatan now. We've actually moved into the Yucatan, but I was very interested because we have the same fat boy facial features we found in southern Guatemala in the previous slide. As you can see here, let me just show you these again quickly. So we have these kind of facial features here. You can see that there, and on the bottom left there, look at that face there, and a little bit on the top left. And suddenly you get an almost identical ones here in the middle, especially at Oshkintok. Now, this is an early Mayan site, probably goes back to several hundred years BC. But this is supposed to be some aged god type figure. And he's got all sorts of things going on with him. There's no official connection with the Olmecs, but it seems like he's some kind of wise man with probably this kind of knowledge that the Olmecs shared. It's also in this area we start to find these sack bays, these sacred white roads of the Maya. So I want to have a quick look at this. Because this is something I was researching recently. I just got back from Mexico a month ago. I was there for 5 months, in fact, looking all over went all through Olmec land, all the whole kind of highlands, Mexico City, the whole Yucatan area. And I was investigating specifically these sack bays because these are very, very ancient. And these are sacred white roads is what it translates as. These are about 30 feet wide on average. They're raised white roads made of stone, limestone, with a layer of kind of plaster, almost like, so it looked like a modern road, but white, made of this limestone plaster. Going on, one of them was 300 kilometers long, or about 220 miles, which went all the way from Merida, and the original site there, the center used to be called Tijo, and there's a major Mayan site. It's got built over by all the cathedrals there, to Ake, which is a megalithic Mayan site, to Izamal, another megalithic Mayan site, all the way across to Naranjal, which is again a megalithic Mayan site. So we have this megalithic kind of Maya with huge stones and all these sites connected along this huge sack bay or sacred white road. Now, the interesting thing about this, I mean, this is one part of the sack bay here, a place called Yaxuna. I visited here, and this place is wonderful. It's near Chichen Itza, actually. It's just south of Chichen Itza, about 20 miles south. It's run by local Maya. They're wonderful people. And this is where the sack bay begins, another one that goes from here to Koba. You can see that on the map there. You can see the Yaxuna Koba sack bay. And I went through, I found all these sections of these, but the thing is, there's a tradition that Quetzalcoatl, who was linked, the original Olmec god, was linked with the construction of these. And this is what really kind of blew my mind, because all the traditions state that the tradition is that he would carry a stone on his back. He could only work at night, and he would, using the magic of the moon and the energies, he would lay down one stone and all the other stones would follow, like levitating themselves into place as he walked through the night. As soon as it became daylight, he got to Koba and he got transformed into a statue because he was working his magic when he wasn't supposed to during the day. So these are like this traditions of megalithic sites in Britain, where if you dance on the Sabbath, you get turned to stone, like Stanton Drew and other megalithic sites here. So we get the same kind of traditions here. This is kind of what the beginning of the sack bay looks like. And you can see me standing there at the base of it. That's how wide they are. This is actually quite a thin one. And they begin at like a pyramid, and then they continue across the landscape. There are other traditions. There are other sack bays here that have been discovered. You have to kind of wade through jungle with machetes, which I had to get this machete wielding kind of farmer to help me find some lengths of it. But what I find interesting about these, I think these are very ancient. You imagine, like, you're walking through at night. That's when they would generally, not only were they built traditionally at night, but that's when people would walk them, because you could see it, because the glow of the moon and the stars would light up like these beams of light going through the jungle, and they would completely clear the jungle out of the way and build these straight roads going on for often hundreds of miles. And this is Koba, and this shows you all the sack bays coming out of Koba. There's like something like 14 or 15 of them, and I found a whole bunch of them when I was there. I got my a lot of aerial film footage and everything else, which I want to put into a small documentary about this. But I believe these sack bays may have been influenced by the Olmecs because of this Quetzalcoatl tradition, these traditions of levitating stones, working at night. And also there are other elements here as well, like dwarfs are often involved in the construction of sack bays. We have this Uxmal in the Yucatan, a famous Maya site, and he said the dwarf did it in a similar way as Quetzalcoatl, building these sack bays, working at night. And he was born from a magical egg by this kind of Kaliek or witch or Muha, of the area. And it became kind of this tradition that they were involved in the construction. He was said to have built Uxmal in one night, the main pyramid there, the pyramid of the magician or the dwarf, depending on who you talk to. And so it's always at night, this sort of magic that was being done. And we know that the shamanic aspects of the Olmecs would have influenced the Maya. And this is the shamanic aspect we're talking about here. So this is actually I want to show you this. This is from Chichen Itza. This is a huge mural of a ceremonial dance or parade at the Temple of the Jaguar. And the upper detail shows these masked, goggle-eyed priests enveloped by the rattlesnake emblem of Kukulkan, another name for Quetzalcoatl or the plumed serpent. Other gods like Itzamna and the Maya rain god Chaku was actually also wears these goggles. He was actually linked with the Quinametsin giants. He was the leader of the Quinametsin giants, originally called Tlaloc. And it's thought that Itzamna and Kukulkan were very similar deities, like Quetzalcoatl. They did the act of bringing the arts and sciences of civilization to the Maya. So they have a tradition of this sort of culture hero god coming to their land from the east, much like the Olmecs. It's almost like the same story, but rewritten. He's represented here by a winged rattlesnake. And also we find multiple accounts if we go further south into South America, of the same kind of stories and the same kind of goggle eyes here at Tiwanaku, for instance. In Bolivia, I mean, these are just clearly on display at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. Same kind of style, same kind of carvings with the goggle eyes. Now, why are we finding this almost everywhere? And even on the right there, we have like a kind of serpentine, on his arms and on his chest with the bird, with the beak and the feathers. And so we're finding the same things here as we are in Mexico. So we have to question, this is the one thing I'm really kind of strong. I'm becoming more convinced. The Olmecs were the builders of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, potentially. Now, not 100% on that yet. There's still more research to be done, but we're finding the same stonework, the same symbolism, the stories of Viracocha. The dating is almost identical, and there's very good evidence that the Olmecs diffused to different parts of the Americas after their kind of main civilization kind of came to a close, and they moved through different areas. And we can see this in all the statues here. We even find stone spheres as well. At the bottom, one on the bottom left, there's from San Lorenzo. The one in the middle, top there, that's from Copan in Honduras. So if you follow the route down and continue, you get to Costa Rica. And these stone spheres in Costa Rica are almost identical and have the same quality of stone technology as we find in ancient Mexico. Let's go a different direction from the Olmec heartland. Let's now head west towards Mexico City. And if we head that way, we start finding some incredibly important Olmec sites. Chalcatzingo actually has dating. This is just south of Mexico City. It's like an hour south of Mexico City. This actually has dating that matches the very earliest Olmecs on the Gulf Coast. And there's some suggestions that this may have even been the origin point of the Olmecs. We have pyramids here. We have these mountains with caves. It was discovered in 1932 in the central highlands of Mexico. And the dating, as I said, goes back to at least 1500 BC. I've been here several times on our group tours. I've been there myself, JJ and others. We have these stunning monuments and carvings, which are almost identical to what we find at Monument 19 in La Venta. This was, it's called El Rey. Monument 2, photographed in 1978. It's the best. I mean, we tried to take photos ourselves, but we couldn't get anything as good as this. this is what it looks like. And we're seeing this kind of rain god symbolism and him inside some kind of cloud storm or kind of serpentine kind of figure, which is very similar. He's holding a kind of Olmec baby as well, which we find in the classic Olmec sites. We have more flying figures here going through, carved into the rock, and another one here. And we have these kind of weird jaguars with, you know, kind of cleft heads and things like this. We have this beautiful piece here, which is thought to be the earth monster. And you're big enough just to squeeze through that, a smaller person. But so Chalcatzinga is a very interesting site, and we always go there on our tours. We find them, it's such an interesting place. No one else is ever there. We have the whole place to ourselves. There's some remarkable things in the museum as well, which is worth checking out. So if you get a chance to go there, or come with us in January, we're going to be definitely going there. There's another site near here called a bit further south called Chimalakatlan. Now, this is what Marco Vergato is in the photo on the bottom on the right there. He introduced me to this site. He believes this is Tamon Chan, the original Olmec origin point. So it's kind of strange. So what are they doing down here? Did they really begin here? Did the Quetzalcoatl and his followers come straight down to this part of Mexico City, begin here, then go back up to Olmec land on the Gulf Coast? We don't know. But something about this site, we have these huge megalithic platforms. And there's been writers in the 18th century who were claiming that this was Tamon Chan. This was the original site. So we see here we've got an aerial shot of the whole complex. It's got a huge pyramid on the top there. You've got these gigantic, huge megalithic platforms, which go on for a ridiculous amount of time. And the Tamon Chan, one of the traditions states that in the valleys below, there were 9 sacred rivers. Now, why is that important? Because there are looking from Chimalakatlan here and downwards, you can see all these rivers in these valleys. So it's almost like the traditions match this location almost better than it does up in Olmec land on the Gulf Coast. We have this site as well. This is further south. This is in a very dangerous area of Guerrero State. This is called okay, let me pronounce this. This is called Teopantacuanitlan. Now, that may not be pronounced correctly, so I apologize if it's not quite right. But here we have these kind of upside down T shapes with the Olmec style carved on them. We have a nearby site from La Texiac in Mochitlan, Guerrero. Again, we have an altar just in the middle of nowhere with this Olmec face carved on it. We have this Olmec head from the site we just mentioned here, a small one, but still an Olmec head, a colossal Olmec head. We have a very similar thing here at Teotihuacan. We have the same principles. So we have these kind of smaller Olmec heads, potentially all the way down south of Mexico City and into Mexico City at the site of Teotihuacan. Now, this is obviously one of the most famous sites, pyramid sites in the world, certainly in Mexico. And this statue here, this monolith, was actually thought to be Tlaloc, the rain god. The interesting thing about Tlaloc is that he was the leader of the Quinametsin giants, and he was supposed to, with his group of giants, so in all the old traditions, the builders of Teotihuacan and Cholula and other sites in this area. So who were these people? Were these actually the Olmecs? Now, there's a big debate about that, but we have at Teotihuacan, we have the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, who was originally an Olmec deity, who suddenly became involved in this area as well. So are we looking at the same culture with the Olmecs, actually the builders of Teotihuacan? And it's said that it was where men became gods. This is the traditional name of Teotihuacan. It's built, again, it's got these fault lines nearby. It's built on these magnetic anomalies. There's underground chambers. There's Olmec-style carvings found throughout the site. We have these masks, which clearly show Olmec-type features. We have, some beautiful photography when you go there. Obviously, there's me relaxing on top of the Pyramid of the Moon, looking at the Pyramid of the Sun. But it's not just Teotihuacan. The other thing as well, the orientation of Teotihuacan is slightly off north, like we find with the Olmec sites. If we head slightly further east from Mexico City, where Teotihuacan is just in the northern part, we go to Puebla and Cholula. It's the small town next to the giant city of Puebla. And again, we have, this is actually the largest pyramid in the world. And this dates back potentially to many, many thousands of years ago. It's actually covers 45 acres. Only reached a height of 210 feet, so it's shorter than the Great Pyramid. But it was here where Hernan Cortes turned up in 1519 and slaughtered thousands of local people actually on this pyramid. But one of the interesting things about that is that they believed he was the return of Quetzalcoatl. He was tall, fair-skinned, bearded, and all this metal on him was like a shiny kind of thing with these war horses and, you know, and the boats coming in, what the rafts of serpents, as it was believed they were. And he arrived back on the prophetic date, the year that Quetzalcoatl in tradition was said to arrive, which is called One Reed. He arrived in One Reed, which happened to be 1519. So he got let into Mexico and dominated the whole place because they thought he may have been the return of Quetzalcoatl. But again, Cholula was said to have been built by the Quinametsin giants, who were there at the very earliest epoch of the ancient world, the first world before the Olmecs. And there's one tradition that say they're the same people as the Olmecs. Other traditions say they actually, the Olmecs battled with the Quinametsin giants to take over Mexico. And so here's actually a strange head, like an Olmec type head, found at the site. It's very rough. It's not the same kind of quality, obviously. We also have these monoliths with these beautiful mortise and tenon joints and holes carved in them, very much in the style of the Olmecs, and even South America, like Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, and other places. In tradition, these Quinametsin were said to be 10 feet tall and weigh 650 pounds. And they populated the planet during the era of the Son of Rain. And this is when, like with the traditions in the Bible, they got demolished and destroyed by a flood that was caused by them being cannibalistic and violent and killers and things like this, much like the Nephilim of the biblical tradition. So we have the same stories occurring in different parts of the world. So who were these Quinametsin, and did they really exist? Well, in the historical record, we have come across many, many accounts of 15 feet tall, 12 feet, 7 inches tall, as in these two accounts. We also have this image from the Codex Vaticanus. This is put into death, so-called Quinametsin giant in the highlands of Peru, this particular area, where these giants were still existing a few hundred years ago. So I find this really, really, really interesting. And the leader, one of the leaders at a different time was Zaluha, and he was a giant in the time of the universal deluge. And he was one of the 7 giants, actually, of Aztec culture. And it was said that the whole country was inhabited by giants who either perished in the inundation or were transformed into fishes. Only 7 survived who fled into caves. And where the water subsided, one of the giants, Zelhua, he was called the architect. He went to Cholula, where, as a memorial to Tlaloc, the rain god, who was the original Quinametsin giant leader, built an artificial hill in the form of the pyramid at Cholula. He ordered bricks to be passed from hand to hand, and the workers were so irritated by Salhua, they hurled fire on the pyramid and the workmen perished. The work was discontinued, and afterwards it was rebuilt and finished and then dedicated to the great god Quetzalcoatl. So that's the story. And obviously Quetzalcoatl, they were said to be like plumed serpent statues found on the top of the pyramid there. Here's several depictions of him in Mayan art. He's almost like got this Jesus look about him in some traditions. Many different chroniclers spoke about him. He had many, and his influence lasted from Olmec times all the way through the end of the Aztec times. He was the primary god of ancient Mexico. He was a ruler. He had all these high qualities. He became confused with this Toltec leader called Quetzalcoatl, who gave himself that name in the 10th century, who later went to found Chichen Itza and brought Toltec influences to the Yucatan. But there's much more than that. He was linked with Venus, the wind, the dawn, merchants, and he was the god of arts and crafts and knowledge. And he was always revered, but he seems like in the stories, he seems like he was a real person who arrived, and he may have arrived with a bunch of Olmecs, strangely, possibly from Africa. He sailed in on a raft of serpents and founded early civilization in Mexico. We have depictions of him here at I forget where this site's from, this site north of La Venta. And it's interesting that the Maya word in Aztec mythology, sorry, Quetzalcoatl departed the highlands to going back to the east, seeking Tlapatlan, where he's said to have either died on the Gulf Coast or continued to this Tlapatlan, which is interesting. So people are trying to work out where this is, but Tlapatlan means land of red and black, and this is also what Kemet means, the land of red and black in Egypt. So we have to look at these connections very, very clear. Here's another depiction of him on a raft of serpents, a bearded cloak. And there's these earth energies that move through this area that almost like follow the path of the plumed serpent. There's some traditions have him as his face painted black as well, like we see in this image here. But this, again, could be a representation of the Olmec. There's a lot of controversy about this, but it could be the case. We also have, again, we have the rattlesnake, the plumed serpent connection. We have Venus in this depiction here from Colossal. And there's lots of very strange comparisons, like with the migrations of Abraham and the people, you know, from that part of the world, which is a whole other kind of connection here, like the tribes of Israel and so forth. But you know, we have the depictions of Chichen Itza, which there's this religious ritual of extracting the heart from a living captive. The winged rattlesnake or Cuckoo Clan hovers over the scene on the left and provides an altar for the scene on the right. So we have these, again, we find these connections, almost identical descriptions that connecting them with being seafaring travelers and potentially from Africa. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, they claim that the Olmec came to Mexico in ships of bark. And this suggests that this type of ship was actually an African invention. We also have the four Itzchakobs, which are like burden bearer gods who support the four corners of the Maya cosmos. This is from Chichen Itza, but we also have the same thing of the goddess Nut holding up the Egyptian sky, you know, and we have these Olmec figures, these dwarfs holding up the sky at Potrero Nuevo, another Olmec site. So we're finding the same depictions. And even people like Zachariah Sitchin, I'm sure you probably all read many of his books, believe that Thoth, you know, one of the early gods before the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, may have actually fled from Egypt with his African followers, i.e. the Olmecs. And this instigated, and this is why this long count calendar was brought over and a new calendar was created on the day they arrived, which would have been August 3114 BC. We also have other Egyptian, you know, potentials as well. Like Ramesses III was a second pharaoh of the 20th dynasty, reigning from 1186 to 1155 BC, which is peak Olmec time. And he had a substantial authority over Egypt. He was linked to a series of invasions, and even traveling and economic problems. But the Great Harris Papyrus was commissioned by his son, and it talks about gold statues, monumental constructions, and so forth. And it also records that the king dispatched trading expedition to the land of Punt and quarried the copper mines of Timna in southern Canaan. And it also suggests he sent emissaries to the land of Attica, which people have never quite understood where this is, but the great copper mines, which were supposed to be there, and their ships carried with them along, and others went overland on their donkeys, and they never returned. But it's said that the ones that did eventually return yielded huge amounts of copper, and the others stayed wherever this land was. And it's thought that this may have been Attica, may have actually been Mexico. There's other connections here. I'll just go through some of these. This is actually from a site that Izapa, which the brilliant late John Major Jenkins did a lot of work on. there are several Olmec sites that believe some skeletons did survive and were found, and they were said to be of the Black African type. This is a Dr. Wasinski in 1972 wrote about this. He also said that 13.5% of the skeletons from Tlatelolco, which is an Olmec site in Mexico City, and 4.5% of the skeletons from Cerro de la Mesa, another Olmec site, were African. They had there's also an African Mande language, which they think is the basis of the Mexican languages. So the stories go on here. We have Saharan Africa 3,200 years ago in papyri that talk about them coming over in boats, much like the Ramesses story. And so we have many accounts. I'm just listing a couple here, just from the research we've been doing, but there's many more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And of course, we also have the winged serpent in Egypt. This is often to do with the underworld, the process of dying and the Duat and so forth. And then we have obviously the migrations as well. And we're not just talking about from Africa here. We're talking about from the Middle East, from China, potentially Polynesia, even coming up from South America and heading south again. We have the Shang dynasty connection. Obviously, we have Friar Diego de Landa, who wrote in the 1500s. He was a destroyer of Mayan codices and big fires, but also then recorded much of the work. And he said that when he spoke to the old elders of the Yucatan, that they heard from their ancestors that the country was peopled by a certain race who came from the east, who God delivered by opening for them 12 roads through the sea, which would be these kind of migratory sailing paths across the ocean. Also, this guy Wasinski, we mentioned briefly, also said he found at Monte Alban more of these African type skeletons. So we're finding very interesting connections here. The cranial deformation is identical. This was in 1956. Dr. Marquez wrote about this. He found that the same type of cranial deformation was found. He found the same kind of artifacts with carvings were found as we find in Western Africa, Egypt, and Nubia, and the list goes on. So we can open this up for discussion now. I just wanted to give you as much information as I could in the time we have available. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg, and we plan to be writing a book about this, because not only this, we've found many more connections with different cultures, many more influences, many more clues, looking at things like not just the astronomy, but also the geometry, the measurement systems, the geomancy and the geodetic connections between sites. We've got more on the sack bays as well, proving that this highly advanced culture, which came from an unknown place, there's many ideas. It could have been a melting pot of multiple civilizations coming from all around the world, congregating in this part of Mexico. And as you can see in the map there, the sea routes take you to that place. And so maybe this was the first cosmopolitan, megalithic, high culture kind of civilization on the planet that could go back to the very earliest times, potentially 3114 BC, when it could have been founded, when the beginning of the long count calendar emerged. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed our talk, our look through the ancient world of Mexico. Of course, you can join us there. We do, hopefully, with the whole COVID restrictions, hopefully running a tour out there in January. We just spent 5 months there. So I'm going to be going back there certainly this winter as well for a few months, and doing more investigation in preparation for the upcoming book. And yeah, thank you for your time. I want to thank Contact in the Desert for inviting me, and we'll see you soon. So thanks for listening, everybody, and please check out our website and books and everything else there. Take care.